Before the newspapers gave me their moniker, before the smoke of the gunfight became my personal perfume, there was a life I was meant to live, a life filled with the scent of Georgia magnolias and the weight of my father's accomplishments. He was Major Henry Holliday, a man forged in the fires of the Mexican-American War and the lost cause of the Confederacy, a pillar in the town of Valdosta. I was his son, John Henry, and my future was laid out for me like a fine suit of clothes. My education was first class. They filled my head with the dead languages of Latin and Greek and the living romance of French, all meant to shape me into a Southern gentleman of distinction. My mother, Alice, was the heart of that world. She was the grace that tempered my father's stern honor, but our world was built on a fragile foundation, shadowed by the quiet plague of the 19th century, the consumption. It came for her when I was only 15, a gentle thief that stole the warmth from our home and left a chill that never quite left my bones. My father, a practical man, grieved and remarried within 3 months. I grieved and never did. Her absence became a permanent guest at our table. I suppose it was then I first learned that the things we love most are merely on loan from God, and the debt always comes due. I carried that lesson with me to Philadelphia, where I learned the meticulous art of dentistry, a respectable trade, a way to rebuild the orderly life that had been shattered. I was good at it. For a time, I was Dr. Holliday, a man who built bridges of gold in the mouths of Atlanta's elite. But the shadow that took my mother had not forgotten me. It found me in the form of a persistent cough, a telltale fleck of crimson on a white handkerchief. The diagnosis was a death sentence, whispered in the hushed tones doctors reserve for the damned. Consumption. They offered me a sliver of hope, a gambler's chance. Go west, they said. The dry air may slow its course. It was a polite way of exiling a dying man. I left the life I was supposed to have behind me and pointed my horse towards the setting sun. Dallas was the first stop. I tried to hang on to the doctor. I truly did. I even won awards for my dental work, my hands steady enough to craft a perfect smile. But a coughing dentist is a frightening thing. The clientele vanished. My practice, my last connection to that respectable ghost of a life, withered and died on the Texas dust. When a man's future is erased, he learns to live in the eternal shimmering now. The past is a ghost and the morrow a mirage. All that's real is the drink in your hand and the cards on the table. In the dust-choked saloons of Texas, I found a new profession, or perhaps it found me. The steady hands that once crafted golden bridges were now tasked with discerning the subtle tells of lesser men. My mind, once filled with Virgil and Homer, now calculated odds with a cold, swift precision. Faro, poker, they became my new languages, and I was fluent. It was in Fort Griffin that I met a woman as wild and unpredictable as a Texas thunderstorm. Mary Catherine Horney. The world would come to know her as Big Nose Kate, a moniker as crude as it was ill-fitting for a woman who spoke several languages and carried herself with the bearing of a fallen aristocrat. She was a Hungarian adventuress, my intellectual equal and my temperamental opposite. Our union was a clash of lightning and thunder, a maelstrom of passion, whiskey, and violent words. We were two broken things finding a brief, jagged solace in each other's company. She saw the gentleman I had been, and I saw the lady she might have been. We loved and fought with the desperation of two people who knew they were already damned. The name Doc clung to me, a relic of a life I could no longer claim. It was spoken with a mix of respect and fear. Respect for my skill at the card table, and fear for what happened when a fool tried to cheat me. A man with a death sentence is not afraid of dying, which makes him a terrifying opponent. The first time I killed a man, it was over a card game. A brute named Ed Bailey, who thought my persistent cough was a sign of weakness. He made the fatal error of ignoring the rules of the game and my warning. The knife I carried was as swift and precise as any dental tool I had ever wielded. There was no pleasure in it, only a grim finality. I had crossed a line, and the path back to that life of magnolias and respectability was now completely overgrown. My currency was no longer gold crowns, but the fear in a man's eyes. I was drifting, a specter haunting the frontier. My only companions, Kate's mercurial temper and the ever-present rattle in my own lungs. Destiny, I've found, has a cruel sense of humor. It often leads you to the one place you never intended to go, to meet the one person you should have avoided. For me, that place was Dodge City, Kansas, a cesspool of trail-worn cowboys and cheap sin, a town that smelled of cattle, sweat, and regret. I had no business there, save for the turn of a card and the hope of a quiet corner to drink myself into oblivion. It was in Dodge that I met Wyatt Earp. He was everything I was not, tall, steady, and resolute, a man who seemed carved from the very bedrock of the plains. He wore a badge, but it was more than that. He carried the law inside him like a second spine. He looked at the world in terms of right and wrong, a luxury I had long since discarded. I saw in him the ghost of my father, the specter of the life of honor I had been forced to abandon. I should have hated him for it. Instead, a strange and unlikely friendship took root in that dusty hellhole. He didn't recoil from my cough or my reputation. He looked past the gambler and the killer and saw something else. Perhaps he saw the dying gentleman, the man of education. I, in turn, saw something beyond the stoic lawman. I saw a man who carried his own burdens, who understood loyalty not as a social contract, but as a sacred, unbreakable vow. Our bond was forged in the crucible of a saloon ambush. A pack of Texas cowboys, drunk on cheap whiskey and arrogance, decided to make a play for Wyatt's life. I was in the corner, minding my own business, when the gunfire erupted. Something inside me moved without thought. Perhaps it was the whiskey, perhaps it was a flicker of the Major's sun, but I drew my pistol. My shot gave Wyatt the second he needed to turn the tables. He never forgot it. From that day on, I was his man. When he spoke of a new silver boom, a town in Arizona with a name that sounded like a final judgment, Tombstone, I knew I would follow. A dying man has no destination, but following a friend like Wyatt Earp felt like having a purpose, and for a man like me, that was almost as good as having a future. Tombstone. The name itself was a poem for a dying man. It rose from the Arizona desert like a fever dream, a city built on a mountain of silver and a foundation of greed. For a time, it was prosperous. Wyatt and his brothers Virgil and Morgan sought to build a life there, to bring order to the chaos. I tried to hang up my guns, even opened another dental office, a futile gesture to a life already lost. But Tombstone was a crucible, and the heat was rising. The town was split down the middle. On one side were the Earps and the business owners who craved law and order. On the other were the cowboys, a loose confederation of ranchers, rustlers, and bullies led by men like Ike Clanton. They saw the Earps not as lawmen but as rivals. They saw me as Earp's personal demon, a consumptive killer with a hair trigger. They were not entirely wrong. The tension simmered for months, boiling over into threats and public confrontations. It was a pressure cooker with no release valve. On the cold, overcast day of October 26, 1881, the pressure finally blew. Ike Clanton, drunk and belligerent, had been making threats all morning. He and his gang were armed inside the town limits, a direct violation of a town ordinance Virgil was sworn to uphold. We met them in a narrow lot next to the OK Corral. There were 5 of them. There were 4 of us. Words were exchanged, hollow sounds in the charged air. Then, the world exploded. It wasn't a duel of honor. It was a messy, frantic, 30-second storm of lead and smoke. I saw a shotgun leveled at Wyatt and fired my own nickel-plated pistol. I felt the buck of a Colt in my hand. Men screamed, fell, and fired from the ground. It was chaos, pure and absolute. When the smoke began to clear, 3 of their men were dead or dying. Virgil and Morgan were wounded. I had a graze on my hip. Wyatt, miraculously, was untouched. We had won. We had upheld the law. But standing there, the smell of gun smoke thick in my throat, the metallic taste of blood in the air, I knew it wasn't a victory. We hadn't ended the war. We had merely fired the first shot of a much bloodier campaign. We had bought ourselves nothing but a date with a vengeful reckoning.
The gunfight was not the end, it was the beginning of the darkness. The law, which we had fought to defend, turned against us. We were charged with murder. Though we were exonerated, the cowboys' brand of justice was far simpler. They came for us in the dead of night, like the cowards they were. They ambushed Virgil from the shadows, shattering his arm and his career as a lawman. It was a message, but we didn't listen. Then they came for Morgan. He was playing billiards, his back to the door, when a rifle shot tore through the window and ripped through his spine. I was there. I held him as the life drained out of him, his blood warm on my hands. I saw the look in Wyatt's eyes as he cradled his younger brother. The lawman in him died that night, and something far older and more terrible was born in its place. There was no more talk of courts or justice. There was only vengeance. Wyatt was made a U.S. deputy marshal, and he deputized me and a few loyal men. We became the federal posse. But in truth, we were an instrument of Wyatt's righteous, holy wrath. We began to hunt. They called it the Vendetta Ride. We rode across the Arizona desert, leaving a trail of bodies in our wake. Frank Stillwell fell at the train station in Tucson. Florentino Indian Charlie Cruz in the Dragoon Mountains. We were no longer lawmen. We were hunters of men, ghosts dispensing a final, brutal justice. I rode at Wyatt's side, my cough racking my body. My loyalty to him, the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into blood and dust. In those moments, with a pistol in my hand and a target in my sights, the consumption felt a million miles away. I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years, fueled by whiskey, hatred, and a bond forged in blood. But vengeance is a fire that consumes everything, including the one who wields it. When our work was done, we were wanted men, forced to flee. We scattered to the winds. My path led me to Colorado, where the thin mountain air was a dagger in my lungs. My health, which I had burned like a candle at both ends, finally gave out. I ended up in a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, a man whose legend had outgrown his body. On my last morning, the sun came through the window, and the nurse had put my boots on the floor. I looked at my bare feet, and I'm said to have uttered, "This is funny." And it was. I, Doc Holliday, the killer, the gambler, the gunfighter who had faced down death in a dozen dusty streets, was to die in a bed, unarmed and helpless. It was the last perfect and cruelest irony in a life full of them. The house had finally won. The legend of Doc Holliday is a story of loyalty, violence, and a gentleman's soul trapped by a cruel fate. But his is just one of many tales written in the dust of the American West. If you believe these histories deserve to be remembered, help keep them alive by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when we ride out with our next story. And let us know in the comments, which legend of the Old West should we uncover next? Till we ride again, partner. Keep your powder dry, your story straight, and your boots out of the fire, and never trust a quiet saloon.